here we go with your questions on a Friday afternoon from the barn, PFT PM podcast. And as always, at the top of the stack, the PFT PM Posse account. What do you see happening with players and teams that have multi-year big money contracts if the cap has a huge drop due to a lack of ticket sales and revenue? Will star/big money players have to be released to get under the cap? NFL and NFLPA agree to a one-time fix, et cetera, et cetera. I was talking to an agent about this earlier today, and the agent agrees with me that this is a potential mess. You take away the ticket revenue for a full season. I don't know what the numbers are, but it's safe to say it's a shitload of money. So you take the big pile of money that is ordinarily available to the NFL through ticket sales and TV revenue and everything else that they make money from, and you take out of that the shitload of money, to use a technical term, that comes from ticket sales, you have a lot less money. You have huge shitload of money minus smaller shitload of money, and I'm going to see how many times I say shitload during this podcast. But anyway, it's something about being in the barn. I'm just more comfortable down here. So what happens to the cap next year? Well, the cap is driven by the amount of money that came through the prior year. But remember this, before the salary cap becomes finalized, it is the product of negotiation between the union and the league. And the union has to be thinking ahead to that conversation, because the things the NFL may have to do this year to allow football to be played may require agreements from the NFLPA. And one of the things the NFLPA may want to agree to in advance is some sort of protection as to how far the salary cap will drop if there is no ticket revenue at all in 2019. So, this is why I've been a big advocate of thinking ahead, of planning ahead, of having a specific plan for every potential outcome and brainstorming all of the issues that may come up. And it really does feel like every answer you identify leads to another series of questions. As it relates to the salary cap, the NFLPA, knowing that they're going to have to agree to things from the league this year as they prepare for a season, the NFLPA needs to be thinking about how to leverage that into some sort of commitment, some sort of guarantee that it's not going to be chaos next year when it's time to set a salary cap and then comply with the salary cap. And from the perspective of the teams, they're probably going to want that flexibility too. Now, the teams that earn the least, they may not be as interested, but you know what? Next year, if you take away that ticket revenue, if you take away that suite revenue, if you take away the local revenues that flow from the stadium, right? And the local revenues that may create disparities because one team is selling out every week and another team is not. You take away the ticket revenue and you may even the playing field. And I think more teams are going to feel pinched if you do have a higher salary cap but lower revenues, because some of these revenues that the really rich teams enjoy every year, they may not be there. And so a team like the Bengals, whose profit margin ends up shrinking because it's got the same salary cap that every team has, even the teams that are making a lot more money, for those teams next year, the hit to their margin is going to be more comparable to the hit to the margin of the really rich teams who are losing money because fans aren't showing up. So anyway, my point is this. Yes, the salary cap is likely going to go down, but the NFLPA needs to be thinking now about ways to ensure that there's an agreement from the league to maybe make it higher because it helps the players, and make it higher for the team's perspective. Because the last thing we want next year is to have this rampant rush to cut players and squeeze players and reduce salaries to comply with the salary cap. I think the teams want to have the money to spend, but there's going to be a limit to how much they want to spend, because you don't want to be operating in the red as a business concern in 2021 because your salary cap ends up being more than your total revenue for the year. But you know what? Speaking of operating in the red, this year may be the year where they're in the red, because the salary cap was set on last year's revenues, and this year the money's not going to be coming in the same way that it would otherwise offset the money that's spent on players. So the bottom line is, this business situation isn't good for anybody, and there are going to be all sorts of consequences, and everybody needs to be thinking ahead about what it's going to do to next year's salary cap, because without ticket revenue, it's definitely going to be an issue. All right, next question, another one from the PFT PM Posse account. I think the defense will dominate the NFL's 2020 season, assuming there is one, like they do at the beginning of the year, while offenses will take longer to get in sync without the offseason. Thoughts? Well, I'd have to go back and look more closely at what happened in 2011, because that's going to be the most comparable season to this one. Because in 2011, there was no offseason program due to the lockout. Training camp started early August, and the teams got ready, and the teams went out and played. And I have a vivid recollection of Cam Newton, #1 overall pick, rookie. No real work was done from a team perspective. There was no Zoom video conference. There was no ability to get properly ensconced in the playbook. And he came out and he was great. Now, maybe he was great because it was his physical ability that was shining through when maybe teams weren't as ready from an offensive or defensive perspective as they otherwise would be. And I think about the quarterbacks who are very good at improvising on the fly, like a Patrick Mahomes. It may help him. But think about this factor. Before we assume that defenses are going to have an advantage, if there are no fans, the offense in the road game is going to have a built-in advantage, because you will never have to worry about noise that forces you to go to the silent count, that gives the defense of the home team that edge. When everyone is going on movement, the defense picks up that split-second advantage that otherwise goes to the offense when second, but it's a big difference when you can get out of your stance and begin the process of bracing for the pass rush. That's gone when it's really loud and you're the road team. All of a sudden, that's no longer a factor. Places like Seattle, New Orleans, Minnesota, the opposing offense is going to have an edge, and we may see more yardage and more scoring in those circumstances. And also, I feel like, especially for home teams, the defense gets lathered up. And I think the defense feeds on that crowd. I think you take the crowd out of the game, and it becomes more surgical, and it becomes more like a scrimmage, and it becomes more like, a 7-on-7. And I just feel like that raw energy that comes from the crowd disappearing, especially for the home team's defense, that's gonna result in more yardage, more scoring, and higher scoring games. So I'm not ready to say the defense is going to have an edge. I think if anything, I think the offense is going to have the edge. Leapers 500, which teams are going to be hurt the most by the virtual draft process? This question keeps coming up. And look, I just keep going back to Big Cat's theory that dysfunctional teams do dysfunctional things. And we know who the dysfunctional teams are. I don't need to name names. Some of the helmets of the dysfunctional teams may be over my shoulder, to the left or to the right. We know who the dysfunctional teams are. And to the extent that the rules are different, to the extent that this new process requires extra discipline for people who are working at home, and think about that. All of a sudden, the guys who thrive on being at the office, the guys who are away from family, the guys who are away from the temptation to do other things, take a little work break, hit the refrigerator, get a little snack, take a little rest, go outside, right? All of the things that you're used to doing when you're at home are there while you're trying to work. And you're a guy who's been so immersed in his work, he's never had to worry about those temptations when he otherwise should be working. The dysfunctional teams are more likely to have employees who are going to give into those temptations and maybe not work as hard as they otherwise would have or could have in preparing for the draft. We talked the other day about the virtual process of getting a prospect on the phone or getting him on Zoom. And when you can talk to an unlimited number of players up to 3 times per week, an hour at a time, that takes a lot of discipline. And some teams have that discipline and some teams don't. And I think the best teams, the hardest working teams, the most creative teams, the most organized teams, those teams aren't going to suddenly lose that quality. And at the other end of the spectrum, the teams that don't have those attributes aren't going to suddenly gain them, right? This isn't going to be the moment of epiphany where an organization that is chronically bad all of a sudden wakes up and says, we got to get our act together. No, you're just going to have more examples of why you aren't one of the most competitive teams, while the teams that are the most competitive are going to show us and remind us why. So I just think that the good teams are going to find a way to do it right, and the bad teams are going to find a way to do it wrong, and it really is that simple. Interesting question from Sando Shuffle. Did you beef with Peter King off camera after he said that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard? Now, That goes back to our conversation from PFT Live today regarding the Odell Beckham Jr. trade report that came out on Wednesday from Mark Malusis of WFAN. And Peter's argument was that he would have taken it more seriously if someone like Chris Mortensen had reported it on Wednesday. And my response to Peter, and I'm as diplomatic as I could be, I could have taken the low road. I could have said something about the 11 of 12 footballs from, and maybe I did during the break, and maybe it got through to the podcast because apparently that happened. But I chose to be professional for a change. And my point was, if you are somebody who breaks news on a regular basis, if you're Chris Mortensen, Adam Schefter, Jay Glazer, Ian Rappaport, any of the national insiders, or even somebody who just covers a team, you're going to get things wrong from time to time. You're going to get burned by a source from time to time. You're going to have a source that you trust who is just factually incorrect. Either that source got something wrong, or that source had an agenda and is willing to play that card and hope that that source can ask you for forgiveness after the fact, whatever the case may be. If you're somebody who does this for a living, and this was my point to Peter, you're going to have more scoops behind it. So you're going to be more willing to take a chance with something that may be wrong, because if you are wrong, you've got a quick chance to redeem yourself. Let me share with you an example that I picked up from Howard Stern's book of interview excerpts. Jimmy Fallon. Jimmy Fallon explained to him that he used to be far more tormented after a Saturday Night Live that didn't go the way he wanted because he had to wait a whole week for the next one. But on tonight's show, if you screw something up, you got another one coming tomorrow. It's easier to get over it. So if you're a reporter and maybe you make a mistake, maybe you trust a source when you shouldn't, you can get over it quickly because you're going to be right back on the horse reporting something else. But when you're Mark Malusis of WFAN, who to my knowledge has never reported anything that registered on the NFL's radar screen as it relates to the never-ending cycle of news, name never stood out for any reason. And frankly, the only reason I recognize the name is I was on his weekend show with Maggie Gray a couple of weeks ago. Otherwise, I'd have been like, who the hell is Mark Malusis, frankly? But if you're going to be that guy and you're going to swing that axe one time, and that's what you're going to be known for, you're going to get it right. Or at least you're going to be damn sure you got it right. And I continue to believe that the reason this got out was that the Vikings were talking to the Giants about Odell Beckham Jr. And that's somebody from the Giants hoping to screw it all up. I mean, think about it. If you're the Giants, and you catch wind of the Vikings talking to the Browns about a trade for Odell Beckham Jr., okay, the Browns are going to get some sort of value for Odell Beckham Jr. Now, maybe you want the Browns to flush the Odell Beckham Jr. experiment so you look better for giving up on him last year. Or maybe you don't want Odell Beckham Jr. back in the conference. There was talk last year that the Giants took less from the Browns than they could have got from the 49ers because they want him out of the conference. Maybe the Giants don't want Odell Beckham Jr. on the Vikings. Maybe the Giants don't want Odell Beckham Jr. to be in a place where there's a greater chance he's going to be the kind of player that he was with the Giants. Maybe you prefer to have him with a dysfunctional team because dysfunctional teams do dysfunctional things. Whatever the case may be, I'm a firm believer that there was something to this. And I tried to explain to Peter during the show. And what he said was, after I made my case, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And look, it makes for good TV. It makes for good audio. And I ultimately said, him saying it was the dumbest thing he's ever heard is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And we had a big laugh and all that. But I believe, based upon the things I heard, and I believe based upon the tentacles that I put out there to try to find out if there's anything to it, I believe there was something to it. And it's quite possible that as of Wednesday, there was something to it, and the fact it got out caused it all to disintegrate. And it's possible that there could be something to it next week. And look, it's entirely possible that Paul DePodesta, when he had a conference call yesterday and said it's completely false, was lying through his teeth. Because newsflash, folks, these teams will, for strategic reasons, lie through their teeth. We've seen it before. We'll see it again. We have no intent to trade Percy Harvin. How many times do we have to hear Jalen Ramsey isn't going to be traded? How many times did we hear last year that Odell Beckham Jr. wasn't going to be traded by the Giants? How many times do we have to be lied to before we recognize in advance that what they're telling us now could be, wait for it, a lie? So that's the point I was trying to make to Peter. And one of the fundamental disagreements Peter and I have from time to time is he tends to take things at face value more than I do. I'm more inclined to scratch the surface and say, there's a chance that's bullshit. So he can have the opinion that my theory is the dumbest thing he's ever heard, and I can have the opinion that he's taking something at face value that he shouldn't. We'll see. But even if Odell Beckham Jr. isn't traded to the Vikings, that doesn't mean there was nothing to it. And I tend to think that if Mark Malusis, unless all of a sudden he is doing a mid-career pivot from radio host to NFL newsbreaker, and he's going to have more and more and more of these tweets, unless he's decided to undergo that organic change to his NFL or sports career, this is the one thing he's going to be remembered for. And I think it's unfortunate that we just write him off as some radio goofball who just got something wrong. Why in the hell would you take the chance on something like this if you think that it may be wrong? All right, moving right along. PFT Sponge, a question that made me laugh when I scrolled through this earlier. And yes, I will admit, this is one of the days where I scrolled through it in advance because it's kind of different down here at the barn, and I want to have it to, slightly more organized. It's one thing if I'm just doing audio, I can fumble around a little bit more because you can't see the look on my face as I'm kind of like going, what the hell am I going to say next? So I want to be slightly more organized and slightly more professional, even though I'm down here in the whiskey and cigar hangout. Anyway, I did look at some of these in advance. PFT Sponge asks, when football returns, do you think we'll see quarterbacks licking their fingers and hands? Or possibly now all players that touch the ball will all wear gloves? Look, I think we still will see the quarterbacks licking their fingers and their hands because no one's going to be out on that field unless they've been tested before the game that they are coronavirus negative. And this is something else Peter and I were arguing about today, because I'm a firm believer that the NFL's last-ditch scenario is going to be creating some sort of a sequestered environment where players are essentially quarantined in a hotel away from their families. Peter thinks that as he reads what Dr. Fauci said the other day, it's not at that point yet, and players will be tested once a week when they're living at home. I don't think that'll be good enough. If the players are living at home, I think that they need to be tested before they walk through the door every single day. Because all it takes is that one guy to go into the locker room positive with coronavirus. One guy. And in that locker room, you're going to have, I'm not going to say every guy, but potentially every guy. Think about a locker room. If you've ever been in one, you probably wish you hadn't. It's dirty. It's smelly. It's close quarters. Viruses spread quickly. Bacteria spreads quickly. Mold spreads quickly. Stink spreads quickly. So if you're going to let guys go home, guys who have kids, if people are back in school then, and who knows what's going to happen between now and September. If you turn on the news, you'll hear every possible theory in 15 minutes. But if the world is back to normal before it should be back to normal, and kids are bringing home the coronavirus from school, and dad was tested on Sunday at the facility before the game, dad's going to have to be tested on Monday when he goes back for film study. Dad's going to have to be tested on Wednesday when he goes back for practice. He's going to have to be tested on Thursday when he goes back for practice. You're going to have to test these guys every time they show up before they walk in the door. And it's not going to be enough to take their temperature, because you can have the disease and have no symptoms. You can be positive with no symptoms. So that basic screening of taking someone's temperature doesn't mean anything if this is somebody who gets no symptoms from it. So my point is this. If we get to the point where guys are going to be playing, they will have been tested before they're playing. Specifically because guys are going to want to go out and just play and not think about it. They're going to lick their fingers before they throw the ball. And you're going to have virus on the ball, and the ball is going to get thrown, and the guy's going to catch it. If he's wearing gloves, it's still going to be on his gloves. It's going to be on everything he touches. If you catch the ball, if the quarterback licked his hand, touched the ball, threw the ball, receiver catches it, gloves on the ball, virus on the gloves, gloves on the helmet, gloves on the shirt, gloves everywhere, you're going to have the virus all over. That's why it spreads through a locker room so quickly. So anyway, I like the fact that there's a sense of positivity. I like the fact that they are brainstorming ways to have football season. But it does not take a lot for me to get to the point where I conclude it's going to be impractical to have a football season unless you sequester the players, or we have a procedure where people can be tested every single day on the way in and maybe on the way out, right? I don't know how difficult it's going to be. I don't know what testing procedure is going to be available. The test that they had initially, you stick a thing up your nose and like through back to your brain. I'd like to think it's progressed some since then. I'd like to think it would progress even more by the time we get to September. But these are very real factors that need to be kept in mind as the NFL tries to figure out what in the hell it's actually going to do. All right, let's see what we have next here. Charles wants to know, is there any actual logic behind the one helmet rule? Apparently the one helmet rule could go away in 2021. I don't understand the one helmet rule other than it kills fun. The NFL's idea that having each player wear only one helmet all year long, not one helmet model, one helmet, and only that helmet. You're not allowed to have two of the same helmet. So you can't have one that is black and you can't have one that is yellow, which is good for the Steelers because I hated that yellow helmet that they wore when you were allowed to have multiple helmets. But what it does is it takes away the throwbacks. And this all came out because a couple of weeks ago, Bruce Arians was on Dan Patrick's show, and he said it like it was gospel truth, that the Buccaneers will be able to wear next year the creamsicle uniforms because they can wear a white helmet to go along with the pewter helmet. And back over my shoulder somewhere there is both the white helmet. I think the white helmet's back here and the pewter helmet's back there. But as long as the one helmet rule's in place, you can't do it. The NFL told me they haven't made a decision yet. I still don't know what the logic is when you consider that at the college level, different helmet every week for some of these teams. I don't understand where the safety component comes into play. If it's an approved helmet design, why do you have to have the same one every week? If it's the exact same helmet, why does it matter if it's not the same helmet you wore last week? If it's the same helmet and if it's all fitted the same way, it shouldn't matter. So I don't know that there is any logic. I just think that the NFL at one point was so concerned about creating the impression that it is doing everything it can to promote player health and safety as it relates to brain health, that the NFL decided we're going to go with this one helmet and only one helmet thing because that's just another thing we can point to say we're doing everything we can to keep players as healthy as we possibly can. All right, next question. Let's see what else we have here. JTrain33, with the teams doing a technical mock draft prior to the draft, do you think teams will use this as a smokescreen to hide their true draft boards? Look, I don't think we're going to hear any teams saying actual real names from the 2020 class. I think maybe what they should do is go back and redo last year's draft and have the teams go in the order of the picks they made then, and they just name those names, or they send out a laundry list of fake names, maybe cartoon characters or something like that. But this isn't going to be a mock draft in the sense that when the Bengals are on the clock, they're going to pick Joe Burrow. I don't think that's what they mean by mock draft. So I don't think there's going to be any part of this. And I'll try to find out how they actually go about it. What names are they using? Because they're surely not going to use actual names from the 2020 draft class. That's something that a GM rightfully should be able to complain about if they're saying, yeah, just go ahead. Let's just go ahead and pick one of the names and we'll just pretend that it's all fake. I mean, it's ludicrous to even go down that path if you're the NFL. All right. A Red Zone App, our good friend from across the Atlantic Ocean, wants to know if a trouble-free draft next week would change the process forever. I don't know that it will. I don't know. Are we going to fall in love with the stay-at-home draft? I think that it's not going to be a replacement for the excitement of having tens of thousands of people present. Now, here's the thing. Next year, wherever the draft is going to be, and I think they picked the location for 2021 and 2023. One's Kansas City, one is Cleveland. 2022, that may be when Las Vegas gets its crack at doing what it's not going to do this year. I think the NFL is going to have to ask itself by next April, will we be at a point where people will show up in enough numbers that it becomes a good visual? That's the only reason they're doing it. Because think back to the images from Philadelphia a few years ago, how stunning that was the first night of the draft to see 80,000 people there. It looks good on TV. That's what it's all about. That's what this all is. It's a TV show. It's a TV show that's ultimately about nothing because the whole thing could be done the way they're going to do it. It could be done by text message. It could be done by open conference call where one team picks after another. You don't need the pomp and circumstance. You don't need the pageantry. You don't need the players there. You don't need the bear hug with the commissioner. So I don't know. Let's see how it goes next week. It may not be exactly like what we see next week going forward, but there may be elements of what comes out of next week that become part of the draft as we move forward into 2021 and beyond. Let's see how it looks next week, and let's see what parts of it we decide maybe are better than what it used to be. And hell, I already can't remember how it used to be. I've been thinking so much about how it's going to be, I forget how it used to be. It used to be a bunch of people sitting around a desk and a bunch of cameras in war rooms and a bunch of guys walking out with their suits on, hugging the commissioner, or shaking hands with the commissioner, or lifting them off the ground or whatnot. And it is going to be very different this year. All right, let's see what else we have here. Mike likes dirt and wants to know, if you could be a scout or an assistant coach for an NFL team, which role would you choose and why? Well, this one's very simple for me. I'd want to be an assistant coach. Being a scout is a thankless job. Being a scout entails a lot of drudgery, a lot of travel, a lot of going to crappy hotels in crappy towns and chasing down information about college football players and kissing the asses of college football coaches who can be buttholes from time to time. I wouldn't want that job. You toil in anonymity, and you maybe, if you're lucky, work your way up the ranks. There's a lot of guys who spend their whole careers just grinding and grinding and grinding and on the road all the time. I don't want that. Now, assistant coaches are going to work their asses off, but they're going to be at the team facility. They get to go home at night, sleep in their beds. They get to be with their families, right? You're traveling with the team. You're with the team. And, you know, for me, and Tony Dungy and I have had these conversations, one of the things I think I would have been really good at is taking film and breaking it down and finding the clues, finding the tendencies, finding the tells, finding the little things. I've had conversations with Chris Spielman. He was on PFT Live years ago, and we talked about the things he would pick up when studying film. I think that my attention to detail is such that I would find that stuff. I would find that moment where the quarterback licks his fingers before it's a pass play. I mean, those are the most basic ones we've heard about before. But, you know, it's almost like one of those games, and I always love those games where you've got two pictures and 5 things are different between the 2 pictures. I always loved those when I was a kid because I could find them. I could focus in, I could find that detail, and I could see what's different. And looking at all the plays over and over and over again, it would be a challenge. Find what's different. Find what's different. Find what the common thread is. I'd still love to do that now because I think I'd be good at it. But so I would have wanted to be an assistant coach because I just think from the standpoint of film study and finding those clues that let you know ahead of time what the play is going to be, that's one thing I think I would have been good at. I may have been terrible at everything else. I may have been a horrible teacher of technique. I may have been horrible at coming up with game plans. But the one thing I would have been able to do, I think, at a very high level is find the clues and the plays that teams have run in the past that would tell us in real time what to look for before the snap when your defense is out there. What is the offense doing that is giving us an idea of what this play is going to be? All right, let's see what else we have. On tour forever, do you think we'll see any big trades in day 1 or day 2 of the draft, considering all teams have their reps at home individually? I don't think it's going to be any different when it comes to trades. Now, I think we could see teams that are more willing to trade up and trade other picks because let's say they've gotten to the point where there's a small handful of guys they love. There's a small handful of guys that they have to have. And they're going to do what they have to do to get those guys. And if they have to give up draft picks, if they have to give up multiple draft picks that would be used under circumstances where they don't have that same level of comfort, that they love a guy because they weren't able to work the guy up the way that they otherwise would, maybe they're willing to make that move. That's why I continue to be fascinated by the possibility of the Dolphins trading up with the Bengals. I look at so much of what's coming out as we approach the draft from both teams' perspectives as just part of the smokescreen effort to get everyone to think that the Bengals aren't budging and the Dolphins aren't budging. And it may be part of a broader dance to get the Bengals to offer more or the Dolphins to take less. And I'm looking for those clues because I think at the end of the day, Stephen Ross, the owner of the Dolphins, I mean, and let's be real about this. And I've addressed this earlier today on radio in Miami with Joe Rose and Zach Krantz. And I think I've talked about it elsewhere on radio this week. And it's somewhat indelicate. But as Sims would say, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Stephen Ross is old. He's going to be 80 soon if he's not already 80. And if you've got 5 to 7 to 10 years left where you know you're going to be in good faculties and you're going to get to enjoy the games and you're going to be functional, right? And who knows, maybe he's able to go past 90. But if I'm on the brink of 80, I'm not assuming I have more than 10 years of good years where I'm going to be fully engaged with my business interests. And God bless him for being almost 80 or already 80 and having the ability to be fully engaged with his business interests. But I'm going to be more inclined to give the Bengals what they want to get them to give me Joe Burrow if, as I've heard over and over again, Stephen Ross loves Joe Burrow, and if I've seen what those draft picks I'm giving up have turned into over the course of the last 10 years or so that I've owned the team, right? We've pissed away plenty of draft picks. We've swung and missed on plenty of guys. But this is the guy I want. This is the guy I want to be the quarterback of my team for the 10 years that I have left, if I have 10, as a highly functioning individual who's able to fully appreciate the fruits of my labor. Let's get Joe Burrow. Let's do what we have to do. Let's make the Bengals an offer they can't refuse. Now, adding to the intrigue here, the fact that the Bengals are so unpredictable. Like, they don't know what's good for them. Like, will they know an offer that they can't refuse when it's staring them in the face? Or are they so dysfunctional? I'm sorry, Bengals, but I have to go there. Are they so dysfunctional they won't know that they should take that offer? And maybe they get more that way. Maybe the Bengals will be that guy that despite himself just kind of bluffs his way into a far better deal than he otherwise would have had just because he doesn't know what's good for him. That's what I'm fascinated by. And to get back to the broader point, because teams haven't had the chance to fully fall in love with the full complement of players the way they ordinarily would, if they have some guys they're sold on that they believe are can't miss, you may have that willingness to move up, because who cares about the picks you're giving up? Because when it's time to use those picks, you don't know what the hell you're going to do anyway. All right, let's see what else we have here. I may want to end on that one. I kind of like that one. I'm trying to find one more. I'm in that mode. Let's find one more. One more. On Tour Forever wants to know if there are any new network or streaming shows I've really gotten into right now. You know, my wife and I have been watching Better Call Saul. Let me say this about Better Call Saul. It's gotten very good lately. I really do feel like, though, that Better Call Saul, for as well written and acted as it is, it's plodding at times. Not TD. It just moves slowly. And I find myself every time a new season starts forgetting what had happened the prior season, even though I watched all the episodes. And like when the latest season of Better Call Saul started, I went back and watched all of the shows from the last season because I really did forget a lot of stuff. And with Breaking Bad, that never happened. With Breaking Bad, I never needed a refresher. I remembered all the storylines, all the plot lines, all the subplots. They resonated. And maybe that's the biggest indictment of Better Call Saul. The characters are memorable because we already knew who they were. The one lingering question is what happens to Kim. And every once in a while they make us think, is Kim going to die, right? And now you've got this storyline. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but the bottom line is there isn't a whole lot of guesswork because we know that Saul lives. We know that Mike lives. Now, every once in a while they do the flash forward to where Saul is working at the Cinnabon and he's been outed by someone, and where is that all going to end and where it's going to tie together. And I have a theory of what's ultimately going to happen. I'm not going to share it now because there may be some people out there who are watching it who are behind by a few episodes. But that's one show we're watching, but I find myself really struggling to stay engaged. The last couple of episodes, though, I haven't had to struggle. I thought the last two episodes were very, very good, and the season finale is coming up, and maybe the last season of it, which is coming up whenever the last season is ready to go. Hopefully it's going to end with a bang, and it's going to be memorable as Breaking Bad was. Other shows that we're watching, what are we watching? Jill and I started watching Little Fires Everywhere on Hulu. The first episode was really good. It feels like it's just kind of gradually like less and less interesting to me as it goes along. Once you start, when do you stop? When do you check out? There are shows where, and I did this with The Walking Dead. Like The Walking Dead, I thought the first season was riveting. And the second season, there were episodes where I remember having it on TiVo at the time. Was it TiVo? It was like 8-9 years ago. And I wouldn't fast forward through the commercials because I needed a break. It was so intense. I wanted to have a few minutes where I could collect myself before we went right back into it. But then I got to a point after 3, 4, 5 seasons where it's like, I really don't follow this anymore. I don't understand what's going on, and I really don't like it anymore. But I have to keep watching it because I've been watching it all along. Like, you have to do justice to the time you've already invested so you keep going. I eventually got to a point where I said, screw it, I'm done. And my guess is, based upon the numbers The Walking Dead generates now relative to what The Walking Dead used to generate, a lot of people have decided they've had enough. And that's unfortunate. That's what Jerry Seinfeld wanted to do when his series ended. He wanted to go out on a high note. And as much as I love that series, I think he's convinced himself he went out on a high note. I don't think he did. I think that there were episodes the last season that were not good. And if you watch the series back to back to back to back to back, and I've been watching it, you can see the progression from how they find their footing to when they find their groove. Season 4, the best. Season 5, underrated. They were still really in that bubble. By the time they get to 7, 8, and 9, and I know at some point Larry David left, but you really start to sense, man, this isn't what it used to be. And by the time you get to the last season, yes, the last season has its moments, but a lot of those episodes, man, they're not good. And the finale, I don't care what they were trying to do, and I know there's a small percentage of people out there that loved the finale. I thought the finale was not good. And but he went out before it really got to the point where people were saying, why the hell are we still watching this? So he did go out on a high note. And apparently he turned down a shitload, I got it in one more time, of money to keep doing it, even though that 10th season may have been an embarrassment to the brand. The Walking Dead stayed around way too long. Other shows stay around way too long. I guess that's my point. You have to know when to shut up and move on. On that note, I'm going to shut up and move on. We'll see you Monday for PFT Live. We'll be posting all weekend long at ProFootballTalk.com. We have our one and only mock draft coming. I don't do 10 versions anymore because everybody's got a mock draft and nobody really knows. And I know it sets the stage for conversation. We'll have our one and only mock draft at some point before the draft begins, although it would be a hell of a lot more accurate if I waited until after the draft started. Anyway, full draft coverage over the weekend. Next week is going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to go ahead and say this now because there may only be 3 of you left watching, and I'm running the risk of a jinx here. But I think we're going to have Joe Burrow on Monday. And I think we're going to do it down here in the barn. Everybody enjoy your weekend. We'll see you on Monday morning for a new PFT Live, maybe Monday afternoon for a PFT PM with Joe Burrow. And either way, stories and content, analysis, rumors galore at ProFootballTalk.com. Have a great weekend. Stay safe.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.